everyone. Third delivery side, and the bench last one. That was great. Right now, we have Wolfgang Goerlich presenting food fight. My favorite critter tool.
Hey.
Lower ice cream and Starbucks connoisseur. So give it up for Wolf.
Thanks so much. All right, yes, this talk is Food Fight. This is some lessons learned from the food industry. And I am one of the proud volunteers and organizers of this conference. I love this event. I'm also with CBI. At CBI, one of the things I do is put on the CBI Academy, which is a 2-year program, and they come in, they work under me for a while, poor people, and then they get rotated around through our different practices. So if you see any of our Academy people, say hi to them. This is my current team. Hi, team. Are you guys in the room? CBI is IT risk management. Thank you. You're good. Send me up in this. IT risk management firm in Detroit. So we do pen tests. We do risk assessments. We do all the fun stuff. This project was done with my previous Academy team. So shout out to them. They did a lot of the work. They did a lot of the graphs and the crunching of the data you're about to see. And this is going to go really, really quickly because we looked at 15 different food manufacturing plants, 15 different locations at the technology they're running, at the problems they're having. I'm sorry, I pace a lot, so good luck in keeping me in video. So we looked at 15 of these, and I'm going to do this in 30 minutes, so it's really going to be like a lightning strike. There's going to be a lot of stuff really, really quickly. It's cool. I'm around all the time. I'm on Twitter, as was already mentioned. So hit me up afterwards if you want to dig into the details of any of these things. So with that, let's start talking about meat. When I started down this road and started thinking about food manufacturing and food processing, I kind of had like these rolling fields, right? This beautiful pastures, this farmland that we're going to go visit. I thought this is going to be great. We can like walk up and see Ma and Pa and hear about what they've been doing raising the cows and the chickens. But of course, real life is completely different. This is a food processing system, right? This is manufacturing. This is everything we see in the heart of the Motor City when it comes to industrial controls. These food processors have the same technology. And not only that, they have tons and tons of electrical technology. We mentioned the consumers folks, and there's a consumers talk here later on at Converge. That same technology is in these food processors. And why? Because they got to reclaim the power. Because power is so expensive, and they have reclamation engines, they have power generation engines, they're capturing methane. What you may not know about the food industry is in a single year, this industry consumes in North America the same amount of power as Utah. The entire state of Utah, spread that out, that's what these people are pumping through the systems. Again, the exact same systems that are covered by NERC-CIP and similar regulations. And that's important, right? Because if you look at what happens with power plants all the time, like this one out in Ukraine, which I'm never, ever, ever able to pronounce, when these criminals go and knock these plants off, right, when they do these attacks against the power grid, that same technology is in our food supply. Similar with water. It takes a lot of water to get animals to the table. I forget, I think it's like 10,000 gallons for a cow. It takes just 10 gallons of water for a single chicken to run through the processing plant, right, and cleaning and cooking and everything. And think about it, these plants are doing millions of chickens. So the amount of water that this industry consumes is huge. Across North America, 10% of all the fresh water gets consumed, pumped, processed, reclaimed, and recycled by the technology within the food industry. Now, again, think about some new attacks. Did you guys hear about the Bosman, New York Bosman? Anyone hear about this one? Denial of service attack. They took the dam down. They're trying to open up the dam up. That would have been kind of exciting. And Kamuri Water Company is awesome. That's not the real name, hence the quotes. Kamuri Water Company was attacked, and they got into this system. This is really old legacy system, like an AIX, terrible old system. And I mean really old, not like kind of old, not like, Heartbleed old. Ben was talking to me, and he's like, I got in this industry just recently, not in the old days when Heartbleed hit. I'm like, thanks, Ben. Thank you for that. Now I could no, I'm talking like 1980s old, like war game style, Whopper system sitting there processing. The guys broke in, they were able to modify the pH value, and they were able to basically poison the water supply. So check that out. It's very interesting. This same technology is in the food industry. The same technology is everywhere. So food is basically a modern marvel when it comes to technology. Processing, manufacturing, moving food through the line, pumping the water, keeping electricity going. All the same technologies and all the same vulnerabilities we see everywhere, but without the same regulations, right? NERCSIP doesn't necessarily apply to food, which is what's in energy. There's not regs that cover the water in the food supply. It's very interesting. And because we have all the same risks, we begin to start to think what could possibly happen. So I'm going to give you guys all a trigger warning. If anyone's got a sensitive stomach, I'm going to give you all a moment to step out. I'm not going to show any more meat being cut up. Well, I will, but not in the next slide. What we're about to show you is what happens like every single time there's a pen test. It happens so often that as a blue teamer, when I used to be a security officer, when I'd see it like on a Windows computer, I'd freak out. I'd be like, oh no. So just everyone take a collective pause. I'll give you a moment. And I'm talking, of course, about calculator. Damn, if every vuln doesn't launch calculator. You guys notice this? Like, oh, we popped XP, we ran calculator. We popped Word, we ran calculator. There's a brand new like way of doing software development. It's continuous integration. It's in the cloud and it runs Jenkins. And there's a vulnerability. You know, obviously what they did was they ran calculator. It's gotten so bad that like my red team doesn't even know where to like launch calculator. They just run a vuln on Windows. So we've kind of gotten jaded, right? At least I have. Yeah, okay, we got a vuln. There's a calculator. Yeah, okay, we didn't keep the bad guys out. There's ransomware. We got to restore from files. Yeah, okay, something happened. But meanwhile, in real life, in the food industry, bad things can happen. The food industry has a very high risk or rate of manufacturing accidents. And I'm not tying those back to hackers, but all the same kinetic forces, such as a boiler overrunning and blowing up, can happen because it's all controlled by the same SCADA systems. All the same SCADA systems are vulnerable. You got explosions. You got risk of pathogens. You got all our favorites, right? Like E. coli, mad cow, salmonella. These things are great. Anyone have these? Do you? Aren't they awesome? Think Geek rocks. I got them for my daughter. I'm like, here, I love you. Have salmonella. Maybe why she's always trying to poison me. But anyways, in real life, bad stuff happens, right? We're not just talking about classic calculator type vulnerabilities. So let me show you a little bit what the technology looks like. Then I'm going to show you about how do we assess it, and then we're going to cover some of the findings we had. In general, when we talk about IT and OT, your IT being your stuff that we're fantastic at, right? We can secure ERP, we can secure our corporate IT, we can do network access controls, we can keep Ben 10 out, we can do all this stuff. Not really, but at least we've been working on it for like 20, 30 years. Your OT, your operational technology, is everything on this side of the graph. Your SCADA systems, your industrial control systems, right down to the PLCs that are moving the chickens and the cows and getting all the orders out the doors. This type of technology, we haven't really looked at all. Generally, security teams are really focused on patching Windows, really focused on patching servers, giving some users some education, hoping that the developers aren't creating vulns, and ignoring this entire piece of the puzzle, which creates some interesting opportunities, especially when you're talking about technology that could be as old as the 1980s AIX server. And it's really like a completely different realm of technology, right? It's a completely different world. You think about most servers, yeah, maybe a couple $1,000s these days. 10,000 if you're being really extravagant. I can't remember the last time we paid 10,000 for anything IT, but it could happen. You run it for a couple years, you have your IT team do it, you can scan it, you can patch it, you can do a pen test on it. Okay, cool. By contrast, the SCADA environment, huge difference. We're talking millions of dollars. Some of these SCADA environments were like, hey, do you have a dev environment? They're like, ha, you're funny. No. Like, why not? Well, that was $1 million system. We're not going to spend another $1 million to dev on it. Yeah, okay, I can see that. Because they're so expensive, they run them 20 to 30 years. I'll get to the age distribution in a little bit, but you can see why we've got this really old stuff that goes on forever. And they're run by the operations team, which makes for some fantastic conversations because it's a completely different dialogue. For example, you might go to the operations team and go, have you thought about wireless security? And they go, oh, our wireless stuff is secure. You're like, that's awesome. I didn't know that because you have open Wi-Fi. And they're like, no, it really is secure. Our wireless is 100% secure. Like, tell me more about that because we're seeing all these vulnerabilities. How is your wireless secure? And they're, oh, well, all our wireless scanners, we lock in a cabinet every night and no one gets to them. Okay, that's a good start. The way that they talk about risk, they think about technology is completely different than the way the IT folks do. And just bridging that communication gap, let alone the political gap and the operational divide, hugely difficult. And a whole bunch of different vendors, too, that we never get to play with, right? Everyone's used to Windows, Macs, Linux. Anyone here playing with robots? Or Omron or HMS? Not really, not really, unless you are in those industries. Alan Bradley is actually the furthest ahead in this, which is good. I'll come back to why that's good in a bit. Because they're actually working really hard. And when one of the assessments we were at came in and sat down with the IT team and said, here's what security looks like from our perspective. But most of these guys don't even think about it, right? They send out the robot and it runs for 20, 30 years. They collect their money and everything's good. And it's not like robots ever have any problems. Much. Actually, when I was real bummed when I saw the robots because I was thinking it was going to be like T2, right? Some Terminators coming in and moving stuff around. Like, come on, like herd the cows or maybe like a robot chicken. That'd be awesome. But no, it's all traditional factory robots. But this one in gray is here for a reason. This one in gray, in Q1 of this year, this one had a buffer overflow, which meant that you could come in, remote in, send it a poison packet, and take control over it and move the robot around if you had the right control software on it. Why this is important is because this robot right here is moving like, you know, thousands of pounds of meat this close from a person, and you could probably do a little bit of damage there, right? If you got in and messed with it. Point is, not your typical farm, not your typical tech, not your typical vulnerabilities, and in a space where the technology runs forever and no one's talking to each other. So how do you get into this environment? How do you look at it? How do you peel back that fog a little bit and figure out where the vulnerabilities are and what we can start to do about this? I'm going to walk through a 5-step high-level process that we followed when we were looking at these 15 plants. And it's going to start with the most uninteresting thing. I almost feel like I should put up a trigger warning for this one as well. It starts with governance, right? It starts with NIST. You look at the standards, 53B and 82. And even though it isn't necessarily the most exciting thing, the fact is that NIST has already done a lot of work for the industrial controls and creates that bridge that allows us to talk about both the risks in the OT environment and the IT environment. So we can start looking at 53B for this side and 80 for the other side, and assessing against that common control. I'll show you how to roll this stuff up at the end of this project. The next thing is, of course, we've got to come up with a really good project management approach. I oftentimes say that one of the things that differentiates a really good hacker team from a world-class hacker team is project management. The ability to organize, get the right person in place, get them out really quickly, right? If you think about like any heist movie, the Italian Job, well, we all want to be the Italian Job. How much time was spent in project management? I think project management would be a lot more fun if they actually taught it, like with the Italian Job and those types of heists. But be that as it may, we start with really good project management. And here, too, pretty quickly, we run into things that we don't necessarily anticipate from an IT perspective. One of the ones that really surprised me, and I never thought I'd get to talk about this, because we're always like, oh, yeah, just scope and resource and schedule. Okay, what could the possible risks of scope and resource and schedule? You know what risk I never thought about? Birds. They wouldn't have to plan their projects around birds. True story, we can fly to certain locations based on the migratory path of birds. And operations folks knew this. They're looking at me the same way I was looking at them when I was asking about the wireless scanner. Like, well, of course you can't do that. Didn't you see the bird map? I'm like, there's a bird map? Like, Angry Birds? No, the bird map, Wolf. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, sure, the bird map. Totally knew that one. So you got to start peeling into some of these differences and figuring out how we're going to do this plan. So governance and project management. There's an old saying, you guys have probably heard this, like, if you want to have a really good day, you wake up in the morning and you eat a frog. Have you guys heard this? Because if you eat a frog, nothing else seems that hard in the morning. The rest of the day goes great. So you eat that frog. You start with governance, you start with project planning, and then you can get into actually doing the technical. And the one thing that kind of struggles when we get technical is there's a lot out there. How much are we going to look at? How many of these plant systems can we cover? How many of the nuts and bolts can we catch? The next step, very important, is being incredibly realistic. Weigh the pros and cons of evaluating these environments, weigh what we can get in and how much of data we can capture in a very quick period of time. Our like litmus test was, is it plugged into the network? And is it something that we can get packets off of? And is it running in the time period we're there? Because we're trying to get in and out, and we're doing these 15 within a week. So we want to get in, get as much data as we can, get as much insight into the risk, get out. We figure we could probably get about 75% insight into the risk, which is okay. That leaves a lot of unknowns. But we knew we could get the stuff that people could get to, which is the stuff that criminals would go after, which is the stuff that criminals could send bad packets at and make bad things happen. So we want to come up with an approach that's very quick, that highlights the risks, gets as much insight as possible, and gets out of there. I'm going to talk a lot about the Pareto principle. I love the Pareto principle, right? Which is 80% of the value comes from 20% of the work. Where's the 20% of the work in this assessment so we can at least begin the conversation between the IT folks and the OT folks? Next thing is knowing that is being very, very creative. We can't scan these systems. A lot of the times if you scan these systems, you'll take them offline. And these are like, multi-million-dollar factory lines, right? And almost every time you get the guy who's like, you're doing a pen test? Are you like the last guy? I'm like, no, I'm totally not like the last guy. I know about bird flights. I'm like, what are you talking about? No, I mean the last guy who did the scan. I'm like, well, tell me more about the last guy. Every single one of the factories had a horror story where the last guy came in, ran a scan, didn't know what he was doing, knocked some plant system offline. They had thousands to millions of dollars of downtime. In one instance, they had to fly a guy out and redo firmware because the firmware no longer existed, and it was in some archive because these are old systems, right? They're not designed to be scanned. They're not designed to be hit. When Ben was talking about that chaos environment, the chaos monkey, these systems have not run against chaos monkey. Hackers, the people in this room, the people in this conference, we've been the chaos monkey for IT for a good 20, 30 years. We've beaten the hell out of some systems. They have changed the network drivers. They've changed the stack. They've changed the performance. These OT have hardly looked at it, right? So we got to have a process in place where we can take our normal approach, run it through a filter, and smooth it out. The way that I went and did this was looking at the configuration files on these ICS and SCADA systems. So first step, pull the config files and run the volume on the config files. You don't really need to track me. I'm going to keep pacing. It's okay. I'm one off on stage. It's fine. So you pull these config files down and you run the analysis, the vulnerability analysis, on the config files as opposed to running the analysis live. So you don't scan the systems. You pull them off. You check them. There's a system or a group called Digital Bond. They've got a ton of checks for this. It's fantastic. Check out the site. They also have some PCAPs and a whole bunch of other things you can play with. The only challenge is Digital Bond works very, very closely with the energy sector, not so closely with the food sector. So our environment, we had planned to use this pretty extensively, but we were only able to actually look about 10% of the systems. But still worth checking. We also talked to Digital Bond and told them what the systems we looked at, so I'm sure they're going to be raising that up. The next thing is to capture some packets. So moving back, as these systems are talking back and forth, right, we got an opportunity at each layer of the network to capture that traffic and analyze that traffic and look for vulns passively. We're not going to scan. We're not going to inject anything. We're not going to risk the production. We capture those packets and run them through a vuln scanner. The way this ends up looking is something like this. We can go ahead and say, hey, here's all the systems we found. Here's the risks. Here's what they are. And you can start to see things like, oh, it detected Modbus. It detected the Siemens protocol. This is probably this type of device. That's probably that type of device. You can begin to get a little bit closer cut as to what's running. A couple caveats about this is, what's your production runs, right? Much like birds, there's like, oh, we need to do organic food, so that goes first, right? Before we run any chemicals, we run the organic food. Then we got a cleaning cycle, and then we've got the run that we only run every other week because it's for a special producer. And then we've got this other run that runs the second run and the fourth run. Well, not the fourth run all the time. You know, there's all this complexity trying to piece together a schedule. So part of the fun, back to project management, is to figure out how many of these runs are going to be operational at the time we collect these packets. Because the more runs that are operational, the greater the chance you can collect more technology, because each run uses a slightly different process, slightly different set of industrial controls. So we run them all, we grab the packets, we run them through a passive vulnerability scanner. This one's through Tenable. And it lists out a whole bunch of technology, and then we can start to figure out which technology is going into which process. These packets, by the way, and these screenshots are not from the client. These packets are from Samurai STFU. You can grab them off downloads if you want to take a look at the packets and get a sense. Samurai is the same guys who do the web hacking distro. This one is specifically for ICS, so well worth checking it out. So my Academy guys pulled it down and ran it through. So now we've got an idea of what they have. We run config files. We looked at the volumes there. We've done a bunch of packet captures, hopefully catching as many runs as possible. And we got a good idea of what those assets are. The next step is basically old-fashioned shoe leather, right? Walking around, walking the production line. Is that a good video? No? Not even funny, jeez. So walking around and verifying what these devices are and getting more intel. Out of that, we've got a reasonably good inventory, and then we can do the most absolute positive, painful thing you can imagine next to eating a frog. And this is, again, kudos to my Academy guys who did this, who actually, some of them actually enjoyed it, which was surprising to me. Maybe we got masochists on my team, I don't know. But basically what you do is you pull down all the release notes. Another thing that's kind of interesting about the difference between IT and ICS is IT, we've got CVEs, right? Which is a great system when you don't have a code name, a logo, and a theme song. We got a way to track the vulnerabilities and say, okay, here's what the vulns are and here's what they mean. In terms of ICS, a lot of these vendors are not reporting them. It's not centrally located. So what you end up having to do is start from the version they're running. And a lot of these versions are 10, 20 years old. And start pulling the release notes and aggregating all those release notes into one central location. Say, okay, this one had this vuln, this one had that vuln. And the history for the past 20 years is these vulnerabilities have been discovered and reported. So it's another cut after we've got the packets, we've identified them, we walked around. Now we log into the vendor portal and we do a lot of grunt work. This is what took up the majority of the time of the analysis. Then we go ahead and talk to the people, right? And we get the executive buy-in, which everyone always talks about as being critical, because it is. Executives say, yeah, we need to know this information. We're going to fix this. We need to do something with it. And you get, which I don't often hear about, the buy-in from the silverback gorilla. Usually when I say silverback gorilla, depending on how much you're in security, they're like, oh, you mean grape ape. No, I don't mean grape ape. I mean the silverback gorilla. Silverback gorilla is the person in the meeting with the most knowledge and the most influence and the most humble title. Right? Silverback gorillas are never managers. Silverback gorillas are the men and the women who are very, very quiet in the meeting while everyone else is talking, and at the end they all look at them and the silverback gorilla weighs in, and that's what they do. Right? Silverback gorillas are the people who know where all the skeletons are buried. Silverback gorillas will sit in a meeting with you in the CISO, and the CISO is like, here's our controls, and here's everything in. We got this, and it's all pretty. And then you go out to lunch with the silverback gorilla, if you're friends with them, and they go, yeah, that sounded really good, didn't it? We don't follow any of those policies. And did you know 3 months ago there's a breach, and 6 months ago this other guy did this one thing you wouldn't believe. The silverback gorilla is the one who knows where all the skeletons are buried. We want to make good friends with silverback gorillas in terms of assessments. And in terms of remediation, the silverback gorilla is also the one where when your C-level goes, hey, we're going to fix this. And everyone goes, uh-huh. And then the C-level goes back to their ivory tower. Who did they look at? Silverback gorilla. And he's like, no, that'll slow us down. Here's what we're really going to do. Right? Too often, I think we overlook the influencers and the ability to have the subject matter expert who actually calls the calls. So we find a silverback gorilla. We get some good intel from them. And then we can deal with, surprise, when we come back with the findings, they're like, what do you mean this is what you're saying? It's always worked this way. I don't know why you want me to change it. Everything's fine. Get the executive support and the silverback gorillas. You can get great intel coming up front and great momentum when you go to fix things. All right, so I got like 5 minutes, yeah? Cool. All right, I'm going to jump to the findings, and we will go. So, asset inventory. One, they didn't have one, which shouldn't have surprised me. Anyone here running IT who has a really good asset inventory? No. But I thought maybe in the manufacturing, paying millions of dollars, you might have one. Turns out, not so much. But what's also good about this is that means that asset inventory was something that we could deliver as part of this assessment. What did we find? We found 8% Frick, HMS, and Entron. 13% were running Opto, and 76% running Rockwell AB. Problem for me? No, not many robots. I wanted more robots. The good news for the industry, Rockwell is one of the vendors who's really got the security under control, and they're doing a lot of good steps to start correcting it. So a lot of them are running Rockwell. I was pleased to see that. I mentioned aging technologies. Here's what that breakdown looks like. A few of them in the past couple years, which is interesting because the new ones are all using web technology. I'll get why that's important in just a moment. Some of them around 12%. A majority around 11 to 15 years. This represents a building boom that happened around the early aughts. Why that's interesting is that means you'll be supporting 2000 Windows XP for the next 30 years. It's not going away. And they got so much of it. And then the rest of them is really, really old stuff. 16 years and older. Another interesting thing in the food industry, in addition to being one of the largest consumers of energy, in addition to being one of the largest consumers of water, they are also one of the largest consumers and one of the few remaining buyers of serial cards. They buy stacks and stacks of serial cards and still run things in DOS and Windows. I love it. So, what else do we find? Segmentation doesn't really exist. Again, much like the conversation with the wireless scanners and whatnot. Like, do you segment your network? Absolutely, we segment our network. Great. So what's your ACLs? What do you mean? This VLAN can get to that VLAN? Yes, but only certain devices. Awesome. How come all the traffic's going? Well, what do you mean? Have you segmented your network? Absolutely, we have. No broadcast traffic. Really? No broadcast traffic? So we're seeing this, that, and that. So oftentimes, coming out of school, right, they're like, here's what segmentation is. We segment based on VLAN, we segment based on subnet, and then we put an ACL that routes all the traffic from one to another. Like, oh! It's not segmented. Everyone thinks they are. No one is. So that's one of the main things, is all this old equipment is basically, even though it's not a flat network, it's a routed network, still on one network. And this gets kind of interesting when you think about third parties, because a lot of these third parties come in. Soda pop machines now, if you go to buy a soda pop machine, come with internet connection. They want you to plug in your network, which is awesome. Cafes want to plug in your network, which is awesome. You name the vendor, they're plugging in the network, which is awesome, and then able to get to all this equipment. Some of the vulnerabilities we found, we expect to find like things like clear text and remote code. It looks something like this. A little bit of SQL injection, a little bit of cross-site scripting. This is mostly reflective of that newer technology that is come out in the past few years, that has lots of web vulns, a lot of remote access, denial of service, right? I was talking about we can't scan anything. Tons and tons and tons of plain text passwords. Very important to note, if you're doing this PCAP analysis, guard those PCAPs with your life, because you'll get a lot of passwords in those to all these plants. And tons of this product manipulation, right? The ability to get in and manipulate the parameters so that you can move the robot, so you can change the temperature of the boilers, so you can change the temperature of the fridge. So, denial of service? No, we can't scan it. 1 in 10 have a vuln that leads to DOS, right? And tons of these plain text passwords. So once we have all these vulns, what do we do with it? If we start in the beginning by thinking about in terms of governance, we can line it back up with a business process. This is a horribly ugly slide, I know. But if you think about, hey, here's how the chicken moves through the plant. It does evisceration, defeathering, right? It goes ahead and it's boiled, it's washed, it's cut, it's packaged, stored, freezed, and shipped. If instead of saying, and I encourage you guys not only in the food industry, but just in general, instead of saying, you know, we've got all these DDoSs and CS or XSSs on this particular Allen Bradley machine. This Fanuc machine is really weird, and it's got this other. Instead of saying all that, we can say, hey, look, your boiling and washing is at risk. We could take it offline. What would that mean to your plant? That gets the plant manager's attention like that, right? So we take all these vulns and we roll them on up, and we talk about in terms of business process. We take all these vulns and we roll them up in terms of governance. So I'm not going to read these off because they're NIST and they make my eyes go cross, but it's much better to talk in terms of, at the high level, hey, here's how we bring together your IT and your OT based on one central risk framework under NIST and report all those vulns that way so that we can back it up and not say, well, Wolf said we should fix this. We can say, according to NIST, here's the risk, here's what you're trying to hold yourself to standard to, and here's how it crosses with the FDA. So those are the vulns, that's how we reported them up. Wrapping it up and taking this talk down, food is a modern marvel. All these same vulnerabilities I've talked about are in every one of our manufacturing plants in Detroit, are in every one of our energy plants, are in every one of our water plants. Those plants, however, are oftentimes a few steps ahead of the food manufacturing because they're getting attention, because they're getting looked at. We've had 20 or 30 years as IT folks to hack and do cool stuff and attack Windows and attack Linux and attack Macs. We've not had more than a couple years to attack this space. So if you guys are looking at something new to play with, something new and interesting to shine a light on and get some attention to, I'd highly encourage you guys to look at the food industry. And I love that this talk bookends with lunch. So think about the chickens and the cows and the vulnerabilities as you're enjoying your sandwich. Have a great conference. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day if anyone wants to talk about any of this. Thanks so much.